Good morning. I'm so glad to be joining you today. I am going to share information with you about a recent report that Friends of the Earth published on genetically engineered soil microbes and some of the risks and concerns that we have related to them. Soil is one of the most biodiverse ecosystems on the planet and also one of the least understood. We are just beginning to scratch the surface of our understanding of the complexity of soil ecosystems. In just a teaspoon of healthy soil, there are more microbes than there are people on the earth. And in a handful, there's more biodiversity in just the bacterial community than you would find in all of the animals of the Amazon basin. We have a lot to thank the micro and macro organisms of the soil for. If you like to eat, thank these organisms because over 90% of the food that we eat comes from the soil. And as you can see, they produce all of these benefits, benefits for us, right? Going about their daily business. Soil structure and carbon sequestration, breaking down organic matter to cycle nutrients in the soil, controlling pests, providing pollination, water filtration, all sorts of important activities. The way we farm significantly shapes soil microbiomes. And you can see there are layers of interacting microbiomes in any ecosystem, but also on farms. And our choices about whether to use compost versus synthetic nitrogen fertilizer, whether to use pesticides or not, type of tillage, whether we grow in monocultures or use diversified farming systems, all of those significantly shape the soil microbiome. Farmers, since ancient history, have been working with the soil microbiome. Using compost is a way to feed the microbes that you want to generate rich, healthy, living soil. More recently, farmers have actually applied microbial products, and these are known as biologicals. So any agricultural product that's derived from a living organism or plant. And this is in stark contrast to the majority of inputs used today in agriculture, which are derived from fossil fuels. So microbes, pheromones, biomolecules like amino acids, and these can be used as biostimulants, biofertilizers, and biocontrols or biopesticides. These have been used for a long time. 1938 was the first recorded time that a microbial pesticide was sold to a farmer. BT is still a very commonly used microbial pesticide. Distinct from BT genetically engineered crops, applying BT is approved for organic production, as are most of these microbial products. Today, there are over 1,200 different companies worldwide that offer many hundreds of different biological products. We are in the midst of a major boom in the biologicals market. The global market is expected to nearly triple in a span of 8 years and reach 29.3 billion by 2029. And you can see the fastest growth is in biopesticides. This summer, I was at the Western Growers' first ever biologicals summit, and that gives you some indication of the fact that biologicals are really going mainstream. Western Growers is one of the largest agricultural trade groups in the US. They cover veggies and fruits and nuts. And the conversation was about this growing market. A lot of motivation voiced was because consumers are demanding food that doesn't have toxic pesticide residues. So it's interesting that biopesticides is the fastest growing part of this market. We've seen a great deal of consolidation in the past 10 years. So these are the largest agrochemical companies, and you can see that they are moving rapidly into this space. They are buying up traditional biologicals companies, along with companies that are giving them the capacity to genetically engineer microbes. All of these companies are offering biological products. Many of them to date are not genetically engineered. So we have to keep this in mind when we talk about biologicals and microbes in agriculture. Many of them are not engineered, but we are likely to see a real increase in the number of engineered microbes offered. And because of that trend, Friends of the Earth thought it was important to compile what we know so far and to raise some potential concerns so that we can better inform the public and growers and policymakers so that we can be making better decisions about how to regulate GE microbes in agriculture. So researchers have for decades been genetically engineering microbes. For agricultural purposes, they've looked at bacteria, viruses, and fungi. Bacteria are by far the most common. The first GE microbe in agriculture was field tested in the 1980s. Some of you might remember ice minus. The presence of the Pseudomonas bacteria, this particular Pseudomonas on crops, allows frost to form at higher temperatures than normal, so increasing frost damage. And so the developers genetically engineered the bacteria to remove its ability to form ice crystals. Of note, this was not commercialized. They moved on to naturally occurring mutant strain with the same benefits, and that is actually used on a variety of crops today. And this is an important side note because from the researchers that I talked to in the traditional biological space, they raised the possibility that there's really no need for genetic engineering because there are so many naturally occurring microbes that we have not yet even identified that likely we could find one to achieve any agricultural goal we would have without the engineering. So interesting that that happened with this first one here. There are two products that are currently on the market that we know of. One is from a startup company called Pivot Bio. The product is called Proven, and it's bacteria that have been genetically engineered to eliminate the off switch on the microbe's process for fixing nitrogen. So these are bacteria that naturally fix nitrogen. And if they are in a nitrogen-rich environment, they will down-regulate that fixation naturally. What this company has done is eliminate their ability to down-regulate the production of nitrogen. The idea being that they will continuously pump out nitrogen and that therefore this product could be used to replace synthetic nitrogen fertilizer. That is a very important environmental goal. We know that, reducing and eliminating the use of synthetic nitrogen fertilizer. It's associated with massive greenhouse gas emissions, with very significant water pollution. And yet this product, although it's been grown on over 3 million acres and bold headlines claim its success, has not actually demonstrated success in peer-reviewed research to replace synthetic nitrogen fertilizer. So that is one product that's out there. Another is from BASF, actually originally developed by Bayer, but they were forced to sell it off to BASF along with another set of products. And this is a 2.0 version of their Poncho Votiva seed treatment. This is a neonic seed treatment, combines a neonic, a non-engineered nematicide, and now the 2.0. This is a genetically engineered bacteria that the goal is to increase microbial activity in the soil. And they've achieved that by inserting a foreign protein that produces an enzyme that aids in converting dead plant residues in the soil to sugars. This is an activity that is happening in abundance in healthy soils naturally that are managed under ecological conditions. So this is a pretty reductionist approach to improving soil health. But BASF is using the marketing of a long-held understanding that healthy soil produces healthy plants, which are better able to resist pests and diseases. And so they're marketing this as a sort of novel, yet very old approach, but novel approach to plant health. We actually don't know if there are other products that have been commercialized, and this is because of the extreme lack of transparency on the part of our regulatory agencies. the EPA's website does state that it has registered 8 GE microbes as pesticides, but it is nearly impossible to find out what they are or whether they've been commercialized. And this image you see is an excerpt of a letter from Pivot Bio to USDA in 2020. And this is as it appears in the public record. There are 4 pages of a completely blank table. And in the margins, everything is noted CBI, confidential business information. So companies are able to redact nearly all information, including what the microbe is here, from public view. And so this completely undermines our ability as a public and as policymakers to really understand what's happening in this space and to develop science-based regulations. So risks and concerns associated with this novel technology. I want to start just with an understanding of the limits of our knowledge and the potential unintended consequences that we already know happen related to genetic engineering in the genomes of organisms. So just to illustrate the complexity and the sort of limits of our understanding of what we're doing, even when we might achieve our goals. Pivot Bio's patent for proven lists 29 different genes and myriad proteins that are involved in nitrogen fixation. And their own published research shows that they were surprised that their particular intervention functioned to turn off or to eliminate that bacteria's ability to downregulate nitrogen fixation. It just as easily could have increased its nitrogen fixation. So that we can tinker with these genetic processes and produce some outcomes does not mean that we really understand what's happening here, nor do we understand the potential unintended consequences for those organisms. We know, and an increasing amount of research shows, that genetic engineering, including gene editing techniques that are claimed to be more precise, like CRISPR, can result in an array of unintended genetic consequences. Inserting and deleting genes, inversions, and translocations that were not expected, right? So it's a bit of the sorcerer's apprentice here, where we've got enough knowledge to accomplish some goals, but not to really understand what might happen as a result. Thinking ecologically, this is very different from genetically engineered crops, which has been to date the realm in which genetic engineering has been deployed in agriculture. The scale of release is far greater and the odds of containment far smaller. So consider that there are about 3 trillion corn plants grown in the United States. Most of them are genetically engineered, and an application of GE bacteria would release the same number of modified organisms about every half an acre. This is concerning also because microbes can readily transfer genetic material between organisms and even across unrelated organisms in a process called horizontal gene transfer. And this means that the genetic modifications released inside GE microbes could move across species boundaries in unpredictable ways. And they could also move geographically very quickly. Microbes can travel on winds around the planet. And so there's really zero possibility of containment once GE microbes are out in the environment. There are also concerns related to altering microbial communities. We know that changes in the microbiome, in the soil microbiome, can result in changes to plant growth and insect communities. This is why farmers use some biological products, because they can result in changes that we do want. But they can also result in unintended changes and detrimental changes. There is a risk of introduced microbes becoming invasive species. And also, just stepping back and thinking about how we are deploying GE microbes within industrial agricultural paradigms and what that means for their consequences. So So we also need to think about the fact that because of the entry of these major agrochemical companies into this space, that genetically engineered soil microbes are most likely going to be deployed within an industrial agricultural paradigm. That's what we're already seeing with the two products that are on the market. These are being grown within, being used within massive monoculture, corn and other commodity crops. And there's no reason to assume that if we're using GE microbes as pest control, that they are not going to contribute to the pesticide treadmill that we're already on. When we're using them across acres of monocultures, insects and weeds are going to very rapidly develop resistance. So really we need to be shifting from this industrial paradigm to agroecological production. We have decades of science showing that that's the direction we need to go. And it's concerning that we've got yet another technology that's being developed and deployed within this very reductionist industrial approach to agriculture. There are concerns about potential human health risks, very small risk, but one we have to take seriously of a microbe being a novel human pathogen. And considering also that we are deploying them in production systems that use high rates of pesticides that we know can result in immunosuppression. And so that's a population of people that might be more susceptible to opportunistic pathogens. We have a lot of questions around consumer exposure and the human gut microbiome. We are increasingly understanding the connection between the gut microbiome and our health. And really, this is a space with questions that need to be answered. Could these genetically engineered microbes be problematic to the human gut? We can assume that people will be exposed to some amount of them on food. And then antibiotic resistance. So genetically engineered organisms often include antibiotic resistant markers in order to distinguish the engineered organism from non-engineered. That to date has not shown to result in antibiotic resistance in humans, but that may change if we are engineering microbes. And so one illustration of this is a fungus that is used as biocontrol, a non-engineered fungus, infecting a stink bug, as we want it to do to control pests. But here's also a case of it infecting a human eye. So very uncommon, but again, we need to take this possibility seriously. So this was a farmer with underlying conditions. This infection was susceptible to only a couple antibiotics. And had it been a genetically engineered fungus expressing antibiotic resistance markers, the outcome may have been affected. And finally, socioeconomic risks. So corporations will have intellectual property rights over these engineered microbes. And as we know from the history of genetically engineered crops, corporations have enforced their intellectual property in incredibly aggressive ways that have disenfranchised small scale and family farmers. And so we don't know how this will play out, but history tells us to be very concerned about the type of power that corporations are going to wield. As we talked about, there's massive industry consolidation in this space, and that will shape innovation. On the next slide, I'll give a little snapshot of that. But also just to raise that we need to grapple with the fact that genetically engineered microbes will rapidly spread in the environment and will contaminate organic farms. And so because all forms of genetic engineering are prohibited in organic production, the organic farming community is really going to need to grapple with this. And the onus should not be put on them for contamination. So just to look at how consolidation shapes innovation, this is looking at the realm of genetic engineering in crops. And that has been dominated entirely by a small set of major agrochemical companies. What you're seeing in this graph is the total acreage of genetically engineered crops grown in the United States. And 98% of that acreage is herbicide tolerant crops, Roundup ready, or engineered to be resistant to other toxic herbicides like dicamba and 2,4-D. So this is, you think of the promises that were made at the advent of genetically engineering crops about what could be done. But this is what we did with this technology, in part because of technological constraints, and in part because corporations will pursue applications of a technology that benefit them and not the public good or ecological good. So for the very abbreviated version of all of this, I would direct you to this Food Tank op-ed that touches on what's happening in this space, on these risks and concerns. And I'm going to leave you here, again, zooming way out, that we know that expert consensus concludes that we need to rapidly transition away from input-intensive agriculture to agroecological systems to address world hunger and the biodiversity and climate crises. So to really understand that pursuing the latest sort of shiny penny or silver bullet type of technology is not going to achieve the sorts of ends that we need, which is truly regenerating and protecting the soil, the water, and the climate, stable climate and biodiversity that food production depends on. Please feel free to reach out with any questions, and I look forward to answering some questions right now.